For those of you who haven't heard about Minerva Project, we are an institution based in San Francisco. We are dedicated to education and learning. In fact, we have a network of thought leaders on science of learning, principles, pedagogical approach, instructional designs. And one of the topics I personally is very interested in is what is the critical wisdom for leadership? What are the skill sets required for leadership? And that's the topic that I'm going to talk about today. Just a little bit of my background. I started out as a consultant, so I was with McKinsey & Company. So I started out in McKinsey as a consultant, and then I moved on to the global onboarding role. So I was the global onboarding lead for about 3,000 new hires a year. And then after that, I moved on to Yale School of Management. I was the executive director there at the Center for Customer Insights. And in fact, I was presenting last year in one of these conferences on behavior science for learning. And right now at Minerva, our mission is to create critical wisdom for the sake of the world. And that's what I'm going to share a little bit our perspectives on what does that mean. This is World Economic Forum, a report from 2018. Again, not in 30 years, not in 100 years, just 4 years down the road, 2022. What are some of the skill sets that are declining? And what are some of the skill sets that are trending? Creativity, problem solving, analytical thinking, social influence and emotional intelligence, systems thinking and system analysis. So before I share a little bit about our perspective, Minerva's perspective on leadership, hopefully this gives you a little bit of inspiration. And if we fast forward 100 years later, what does that mean? In fact, I want to encourage you not to think even 100 years later, just to think about 30 years later, right? By 2050, what will the world look like? What does leadership mean? So we already know, we don't need to wait till 2050. We already know that there are these connected technology and smart devices and Internet of Things. This is already happening with the self-drive cars and Internet of Things and how the city is being connected. You can recognize every single thing on the road, and this is already happening, right? This is not the future. This is already starting to happen, and you have this whole connected city. If you look at what happens in factory, in manufacturing, robotics are coming in with artificial intelligence, and it's really automating a lot of the supply chain and the jobs that takes human workforce to produce. What does it look like in healthcare? So of course you probably have heard about IBM Watson, right, doing a lot of the AI in healthcare, predictive diagnostics, predictive medical outcomes. We also have virtual reality, augmented reality coming to play, and literally you can do a heart surgeon for someone right here in Florida to someone in Africa in a couple of years. And the introduction of 5G, which is the new way of data transmission, is really enabling these kind of technologies to happen, because it used to be a 5 seconds latency time, and that is really the bottleneck of everything like that. But with 5G, which is 20 times as fast as 4G, this is a revolutionized technology that is going to change a lot of the practices, even professional practices. What does entertainment look like? This is Louvre Museum. This is the experience they are offering to their audience already today. Right? So you no longer need to look at Mona Lisa under the armpit or elbow of people. You can be at home and be experiencing entertainment way to look like. So virtual reality, augmented reality is changing the way people entertain. It's also changing your retail experience. Right? So you can be sitting at home and you can be changing your shoes or your apparel. This is already happening in apparel shopping. It is happening on home furniture shopping. You probably have heard about the IKEA VR app or the Home Goods VR app. So retail experience is also changing. And customer service. A lot of the customer service personnel workforce will be replaced by 2030. You You may have heard about call center replaced by an AI bot, for example. I went to Tokyo a couple of months ago. There's this little robot at the airport serving me and telling me which gate to go to. Very friendly, reads my emotion as well. And this is a coffee barista, right? So you'll see these customer service personnel being replaced by robotics and AI technology very soon. So the world is changing. Quantum computing is filling the velocity and volume of big data combined with AI, technology, artificial intelligence, NLP, neuro-linguistic processing, is really creating a wave of transformation across industries, from automobile to healthcare to even consulting, legal services, across domains, right? From operations, supply chain to customer service. Automation, again, artificial intelligence, data, robotics coming in play. These are really compounding technologies, really changing the way we operate. Again, from operations all the way to different domains. Augmentation of experiences. I told you about 5G, right? The 5G is not just a leap from 3G to 4G. It's really, I was talking to the head of L&D in Verizon at another learning conference. It's really revolutionizing how the way we work because of these Internet of Things mobile devices. Virtual reality, augmented reality is going to change our experience and augment our senses. And it's not just technology either, it's also a mindset and cultural shift. Right? So you probably hear a lot more about changing in ownership thinking, right? Uberization of everything, right? Increasingly intermediation, like taking out the middleman using platforms. Decentralization, and we talked a lot about this morning, right? The workforce is being distributed, your leadership are being distributed, they are decentralized globally. I wanted to move forward to share a little bit how we think about dynamic leadership, skills for dynamic leadership. And we really want to share a set of habits of mind and foundational concepts. And what do we mean by that? Habits of mind are really the mental models or the framework that we want to instill in our leadership's mind and make it a habit, right? Through deliberate practice, we transfer the knowledge and make it into a habit. So that's the habits of mind. Foundational concepts is complementary wisdom or concepts that we want to share. And we call these HCs, and for each learning session we provide to our learners, we think about what HCs are important in that session and we communicate that in advance. So some of the HCs that are my personal favorite that I want to share, going back, so, yeah, is some of these on the screen here. I hear a little bit about capability mapping and leadership development models. So this is essentially our thinking based on the past 5 years of over 40 academic experts from Wharton, Harvard, Michigan Law School, and industry experts as well on business, to think about what are the critical skills that we think are important for future leaders. And it includes things like bias mitigation and identification, include things like nudging, like behavior science for leadership, include things like power dynamics. And we think about power dynamics very differently from the traditional sense of power. We think about power of network, power of expertise, power of influence. We talked about analyzing problems, ethical framing, creative heuristics, innovation as well. Let me share with you a few of these in a more concrete way. Problem solving. I really want to think about problem solving not just in the traditional sense of breaking things down, creating issue trees, finding constraint, mapping initial and goal state, not just on that very logical reasoning part of problem solving. Thinking about divergent problem solving as well. This comes from Obama when he was still in the White House. Once he was quoted that when a decision comes to my table, the easiest options are already gone. Right? Someone would have already suggested it, even implemented it, executed it. It's really the most complex decisions that come to my mind, my table. And this is not just Obama. we as leaders are increasingly facing this, because in 20 years' time, artificial intelligence can take care of a lot of simple solutions, automating solutions, and decision selection. And whatever comes to your table, your leader's table, will be the most complex and difficult one to solve. So the traditional sense of problem solving or convergent thinking is no longer sufficient. It's still very critical, but it's no longer sufficient. You really need to think about divergent thinking. Ideas or options will become more ambiguous, and how to think about a divergent way using creative heuristics to ideate on solutions and to generate alternatives, to be able to experiment it, prototype it, test it, refine it, fail and success, go through that cycle is increasingly more important. And I really like this, I forgot the source, this is from Pragmatic Imagination, a book that I really like. Thinking about not just the sense-making part of problem solving, but the sense-breaking part. I admit that I myself always go into that zone, right, of perception reasoning. But a lot of our leaders are not really playing a lot in the right-hand side, right? Speculation, experimentation, free play, using imagination to think about alternative solutions. And remember, imagination, according to the book, is not just on the right-hand side. Every single bit, even if you think about reasoning perception, imagination can come to play, using analogies in your reasoning, using constraint to think about solution. So that's problem solving. The next one I want to share is about decision making. These two are linked together, but really want to hone in one aspect of decision making. And let me start by sharing a story. This is a story from World War II. So after World War II, the US Army were re-examining some of the airplanes that come back from the field, from the German warplanes. So they were gathering these data, they were analyzing these data, and they were looking at where the damages are on these airplanes that come back. And this is the results of the survey they did, right? The red dots are where damages happen, right? When they analyze the hundreds of planes. So the question for the general is, where should he increase armoring? Where should he put all these armor in place to increase the production? What do you think? Looking at this picture, where should armoring happen? The wings, the middle, the tail. You're all trapped in survival bias. Where should it be? Around the pilot, around the head, the white areas, right? Why the white areas? Not the red dots. These are the survivors. These are the planes that returned from the war zone. They were the ones that crashed. They were the ones that were shot down. Those are the ones that we didn't know what happened to them, but they never came back. These are the ones that came back, which means where the dots are probably are not the most critical parts of damages. And actually, this is a real story, right? The whole team was analyzing, and they actually was reinforcing the middle part, which is called the fuselage, I can't pronounce it. It's where the, So they were doing this until a statistician, his name is Abraham Warren, I think. He came from the Eastern Europe. He joined the US Army as a statistician, and then he pointed out that, no, this is not the way you should look at the data. The white areas is where you should focus. Survival bias. Another example. So I'll give you a scenario. Imagine you were given $50. You are asked to choose between one of the two options. Keep the $30, or you have a chance to gamble 50-50, keeping or losing the $50. Just from your gut instinct, which one do you choose? People A, okay, A, most of us. B, few of us. Okay, another scenario. Imagine you were given $50, you're asked to choose between one of the following options. Lose $20 or do the gamble. A, fewer. B, right? Okay, more people on B. So, next. When you look at it side by side, it's the same thing. It's exactly the same question, and the two options are exactly the same. Right? Keep $30, lose $20, same thing. Gamble, same thing. But the fact is, statistically, On the left-hand side, 43%, just as we are a very classic group here, 43% will choose to get more, and 61% on the second scenario will choose to get more people. And the reason is hardwired in the brain. It's loss aversion. It is a concept coined by Danny Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize on Behavior Economist. I studied a lot of the work, thinking system 1, system 2, loss aversion. And in our brain, we are hardwired to be more risk averse, or be less risk averse when the framing is a loss frame. This is just one of our cognitive biases. Another one, confirmation bias, prevalent everywhere in your company. I'm sure you see it, I'm sure you've experienced it at some point during your leadership journey. Very important to recognize some of these biases. And the reason, the science behind it is this, right? We have different ways of making decisions. System 1 and system 2, according to Danny Kahneman. System 1 is intuitive decision-making process. It's fast, automatic, is intuitive, is hardwired, is emotional. System 2, on the other hand, is the cognitive process of thinking. Right? It is slow, it is effortful, and we make most of our decisions based on system 1 because we don't have the cognitive resources to do system 2 all the time. And it's not like system 1 or system 2, one is bad and one is good. It's really not like that. This is just the way we are hardwired. So having that metacognition, the thinking or the awareness that we think in this way, and understanding some of these biases, like sunk cost fallacy, availability heuristic, confirmation bias, some of the biases that are very prevalent in the workplace, is going to take a leader a lot further in their journey. So decision making, managing bias. The final habits of mind that I want to share with you, and this is also one of my personal favorite, is system thinking. Very important for a complex adaptive leader. Very important for this world, managing complexity. In fact, the professional learning course that I'm working a lot on is about managing complexity. What do we mean by system thinking? It's really about being able to zoom in to the minute details and understand the components of the system and the interaction and predict what things happen and why, but also able to zoom out and look at the holistic picture, the system, the complexity. I really like, there are many different system thinking tools and frameworks, first of all. The one that I really like is the iceberg model. Really thinking not just at the tip of the iceberg, the events that happen or the properties of the system. This will get you to a reactive mode all the time. You're reacting all the time. As a system thinkers or system leaders, you really need to go down, dig deep into what are the patterns and trends, the underlying structures, and more importantly, the biases, the mental models, the people in that system. Why does it happen that way? And that gets you into the transformation mode. You're able to redesign the system. Another related system tools that I think is very useful as well is causality mapping. So it's really thinking about what causes what, the interrelationship of cause and effect, feedback loops, thinking about at which stage you can really reinforce something to happen, the positive feedback loops, and at which part of the system you can balance things out, balancing feedback loops. So having a map like that really helps in cases where, for example, the company is failing, or in cases like the culture needs to change, like what are the key levers or intervention point that you can draw in that company? So it's a very useful tool as well. This is how I visualize sort of the learning journey, whether it's for onboarding or for management training or for hypo training or for executive training. Really thinking about the habits of mind, which is the first column, the learning outcomes, and think hard about what you want to produce there. And if you are interested in some of those habits of mind that I shared, or if you are interested in science of learning principles, how do you think about pedagogical approach to create a program, or to design a learning program, this is the book that our founder founder wrote from MIT Press. So we created a new university that would train students, 18-year-old, 22 years old, on critical wisdom based on science of learning. And we want to pull that now into the professional learning workforce training space as well. So happy to chat more and take questions.